And thank you to all of our panelists. So we'll do a couple of questions and then we'll turn it back to the audience, and starting with Han, so we got the microphone, and then we'll come back this direction. Let me ask each of the panelists, will the tranche 4 tariffs, the ones that were just proposed, the hearings are starting June 17th, will the tranche 4 tariffs take effect, and at what rate? Knowing what you know now.
So we just recently did a spreadsheet for our member companies to really space out the timing of the previous tranches of tariffs. I think the biggest challenge for us, in addition to the value of the additional tariffs, the 301 tariffs, is the mitigation time period. So for tranche 1, we had 21 days of notice before those tariffs went into effect. They went down to 15, then they went down to 7. And I guess you could give the administration some credit for this last increase, that they gave us some timeline. So if you exported from China by a certain date and then they imported it after a certain date, then you're spared. I think that is creative. It created a lot of chaos between U.S. Customs and Border Protection and the folks that are effectively collecting the tariffs and USTR. But that's the kind of chaos that I think that is upturning global value chains in a way that is not productive, that's not going to drive U.S. production here to the United States. So to answer your question, I would say that given the timeline that the Xi-Trump meeting won't happen until the end of June, and that those hearings won't likely wrap up until the end of June, I would suspect that there is a possibility, I would like to be an optimist, that these tariffs are not put in place. But there is so much work to be done over the next several weeks that is unclear to me how the administration doesn't put at least a 10% tariff in place, knowing full well that at 10%, we're not going to feel that pain, as you saw the administration committed to only providing a tranche 3 product exclusion if the tariffs went up to 25%. So you all can take pain at 10%, but at 25, maybe we'll pick the winners and losers.
I don't know.
I should have started with that.
Absent a breakthrough, I think that it's almost certain that some of the tariffs will take effect within a reasonable time frame. That because I think that's what the president believes is leverage. So I guess that's my best educated guess.
I'm not going to even start to guess. Just say that for us, the semiconductors, and for most of you and other consumers, that's the big one, this last list. For the large part, for very solid political reasons, and tons of great work, consumer goods have been kept off the tariff lists. But if that comes in at 10 or 25%, semiconductors, because these are our customers, will get hit, and so will the American consumer.
I'm more of a pessimist. I think it's definitely going to take effect. At what rate, I don't know, but I just, like Aaron was saying, talks have stalled. I don't see a point of which they pick up or of which we have some kind of deal beforehand. So I do think it's going to happen. I just, again, I don't know about what rate.
We're going in much more pessimism as you come down the line. We are telling companies they should plan that tariff list is going in place likely at some point in July at the full 25% rate. I mean, that is the only prudent way that companies can look at what's going on. Then you get a reprieve if it doesn't happen, but the administration has kept to its word on previous lists, and so it would be unwise to think that they won't follow through.
Great. Ask Beth a follow-up question. So a lot of news last week about the agricultural mitigation programs. You're sort of here representing larger agriculture. Can you talk a little bit about how that's affected dairy or could affect dairy, and sort of the overall sense from the agricultural community about how those programs work?
Sure. I mean, if you look at all the press releases from last week about the president's announcement on trade mitigation, everyone will say they welcome it, they applaud it. And it's true because the farmers in the agricultural community are being hit. We are collateral damage always. Retaliation is hitting every sector, I think, of the ag community. But really what we all want are new markets. We want to continue to export. That is what is going to keep farmers in business. That's what's going to keep manufacturers in business. That's what's going to grow jobs, American jobs, and create new plants. A few of our members have created plants just for export to China. And they want to continue doing that. So trade mitigation is a nice, and I've read it somewhere, a nice Band-Aid maybe for now, but long term, it's not going to keep farmers in business. It's not going to keep exports growing. We need a level playing field with China, and that was even before this trade war. So I think the direct payments to farmers, we'll see how that is, how the math works out there for us, for our processors. We're happy that some of the purchases of fluid milk will be going to food banks to help food insecure families. That's a really big deal for us and for our members, and of course for that community. So we're happy and we're excited about that piece of it. But the overall trade mitigation, I think, really, farmers would rather have the export market than get these kind of after the fact payments.
And just to cue off a question that, or a comment that Scott made, and kind of asked the whole panel, what evidence do you see about either manufacturing coming back or global value chain sort of being able to react dynamically to this? And I'll have everyone go back down, and Scott, I want you to talk about this as well.
Yeah, sure. So from the U.S. China Business Council's perspective, we've got companies that roughly fit into three categories. We have companies that make things in the U.S. and ship it to China. We've got companies that make things in China, ship it to the U.S., and then we've got companies that are in China to access Chinese customers. That category is the largest. But where you fit on that spectrum is how you are considering what you're going to do if we are in a prolonged tariff situation. If you're making in the United States for export to China, you might be looking at either moving your production to Mexico. Ironically, there are companies in that category, probably that are among those customers that John was talking about, who make things in the United States to protect their IP, but they have an essential widget that comes from China. And doing it in the United States allows them to have the highest level of IP protection, but now their product exported to China has a 25% tariff on it, and so they need to look at alternative ways to do that. So alternative regions outside of the United States that would get you into China without a tariff. Similarly, companies that are based largely in southern China that were exporting to the United States as their primary market. We have seen movement to the TPP countries, to other areas. But for the companies that are doing business in China to access customers in China, we are definitely seeing companies that are doubling down and moving their entire production chain into the country. Now, this is the nature of what companies' purpose is. They're in business to make money, so they go to where they can to make the money and be able to maintain their business model. But hopefully this is not the intention of the policy. We really need to be getting back to a place where companies can choose where they produce based on something other than what the U.S. tariff or Chinese tariff is on their product.
Yeah, just in general, not necessarily just about semiconductors, but as someone who's been doing trade for many years, investments moving supply chains around, they go to the best business environment, and you gotta ask yourself, do you bring new investments to an economy where the inputs cost more because of tariffs on key things like steel and now potentially across the board, all inputs? Also, do you bring your investments to an economy where there's not a premium on training workers? STEM education is not emphasized in this government like it should be, and also the foreign workers that we do bring in, foreign students we bring in, we do a great job of training them at universities. We also do a great job of making sure once they get their degree, they got to go home and work for the competition. So until some of these fundamental things get fixed, I don't see a major return in manufacturing to the United States.
interesting part about this question is that for several of our member companies, over 50% of their products that they sell are sourced here in the United States. And that's a fact that I think traditionally you think of retailers as major importers, and we are. But I think that for many of the products that we do sell, many of those are sourced here in the United States. I think it's also interesting when the tariff policy has created a perverse incentive for our manufacturers. Several of the manufacturers that we work with, we worked to bring that manufacturing back into the United States from China, and then unfortunately the motor that goes into that manufactured part gets onto the tariff list on tranche 1 and tranche 2, and then these companies are reevaluating whether or not it was worthwhile for them to move, 1, and 2, whether it's worthwhile for them to leave the United States and go back to China. I think that that is that uncertainty of not knowing how long these tariffs are going to be in place are creating those kinds of discussions with our suppliers who we've built these secure supply chains to make sure that we get the volume and the quantity and the quality that we're looking for. I think also, interestingly, the tariffs have an interesting effect also on the IP protection that Aaron had talked about. You know, several of our member companies design and innovate some of these products that they then go to sourcing to companies, manufacturers abroad, where they control that entire supply chain, where they ensure that the shoes or the apparel item or that particular consumer electronic are protected throughout that process. So, you know, upending that or causing them to move out of China creates risk for them in a way that they have to also evaluate as to whether or not it's worthwhile to change and move out of China.
Just briefly, I completely agree with John that there's other policies that the government needs to, with respect to training and immigration, to have an attractive business climate to make it successful. There were reshoring trends underway before the tariffs, and they were geared towards industries that are more energy intensive. That's one advantage that the tariffs won't impact in any way, that energy is getting relatively less expensive in the United States compared to virtually all of our trade partners. So the more energy intensive the manufacturing, the more likely it is that there's going to be a look at reshoring some or all of it. There's no reason to think that that trend would in any way subside without respect to the tariffs. Again, I'm just looking at the surveys of purchasing managers and others who are saying that they are actively looking at reshoring or alternate sourcing from China. Obviously, more so since the tariff announcements. But you know, can a company count on having 25% tariffs or not in 5 years? I think that's an incredibly difficult judgment to make, and one that, you know, I don't think the tariff should be a permanent policy. I think it's much better for both economies to have some sort of an accommodation that results in lasting change.
We touched the question. Beth, did you want to answer that, or?
No.
Okay. Give it to Ken to kind of open up for the audience Q&A.
Thanks. Thanks, Steve. We're going to open up to questions. We have a mic runner coming around. I'd like to ask that folks please, when the mic comes to you, please identify yourself, your affiliation, and we like to follow Jeopardy rules here. Please ask your question in the form of a question. So with that.
I'm Louis Leibowitz. I'm an attorney here in Washington for some period of years. Thank you all very much for a very frank and interesting presentation. I wanted to go back to the objective of the trade war, which I'll call it in shorthand, and whether the tariffs that are in existence or threatened at the moment are sufficient, in your view, to reach a deal between China and the United States. And whether additional assistance in the form of cooperation from other countries is necessary or desirable, and if so, how to achieve that.
That's a great question. I completely agree that a more effective strategy would be some coalition of the willing. I don't necessarily think the WTO is the right route, but if it was the US, the EU, basically the NAFTA countries and others, I think there's some reason to believe on some of these issues that you could probably make more progress. Completely agree with that. I'm just going to give a very quick steel example to kind of make the point. So certainly from the producer side, the steel tariffs have had a good impact for them in the United States. However, they haven't fundamentally changed the dynamics of the global steel market. There's still an incredible amount of overcapacity, which results in all sorts of bad behavior in the market, and particularly in China. So China hasn't ramped down its production, hadn't shut down mills, and in fact is producing more steel than ever, steel that no one needs. And so I ultimately think that you will need that type of collaboration. I think it has to have a harder edge to it than it's had in the past, but I think that that's vital to making the strategy a successful one.
Let me just say quickly, echoing what you just said about the multilateral approach. I've been in the trenches fighting bad Chinese policy for 20 years, and I can say we've had success in a number of areas and on a number of occasions, and every time we had success, the common feature was we did it with like-minded coalitions, with the Japanese, the Europeans. I'll say that we always led the charge, and others follow along, but without others in our wake, it would have been impossible to get success.
I'll just reject the idea that the tariffs have done anything to help get us moving forward at all. All of the economic analysis that was done by Chinese and American economists that I've seen show that throughout 2018 there was zero effect of the tariffs on China's ability to be able to mitigate the issues. That could be because of some of the issues of currency. It could be because of, as Honey pointed out, that some of these tariffs could be mitigated through other means, but it did nothing. In 2019, to have moved to higher tariffs on the kinds of products that frankly are more important to us in our day-to-day lives than anything else, I don't think that's going to focus their attention. And China has already let it be known that they are very willing to subsidize their way out of this, and they have done that successfully in the past. So what we have here is a strategy where we have made a very dramatic point of putting a tariff on a lot of imports, and potentially every import, for zero gain. Now, the irony out of all of this is that China is interested in talking about these issues. The last time we actually saw movement on some of the types of structural issues that we've been talking about was when TPP was under negotiation, and China was very concerned about what was going to happen with this massive trading bloc with the United States on its border. That was when the bilateral investment treaty negotiations were making progress on issues like technology transfer, IP protection, and then TPP went away and well, nothing else happened in China. Interestingly, I think that the Chinese have been interested in getting back to the table. And because of the fact that it's not just America, but also Japan and Europe and others saying that China does need to do a better job on some of these issues, those people who were willing to do reform were empowered again to come to the negotiating table. But adding more tariffs, I think, undermines those like-minded officials in China's position to be able to get the kind of changes that we actually want. So I think we are facing diminishing returns at this point.
Steve, let me just put one other thing out there we've kind of overlooked, and maybe everyone understands it already anyway, but let's face it, most of us don't like the tariffs, but also let's be honest that these tariffs have got the Chinese attention. And there are a lot of serious underlying problems in the way the Chinese run their economy that gives a lot of us heartburn. I talked about some of them already, the IP problems, IP protection, IP enforcement, forced tech transfer, massive state subsidies. So while a lot of us don't like the means to the end, we have got the Chinese government's attention. Now, what we all hope is that there can be a successful execution of this effort and give us all some kind of positive result. And that's, I think, where people have questions.